Hey gang, Dr. G here, fantasy author, psychiatrist, an all-around good guy, talking about trauma today. So every day I encounter individuals that have endured trauma, often childhood trauma involving emotional, sexual, or physical abuse, or maybe all three. There is a fourth kind of trauma that is very insidious but no less damaging, and that's neglect. I will be diving into that in a later video, but for now I want to tell you about the lie that all four of these kinds of trauma cause you to believe in. And this lie is so powerful, it can be very difficult to dislodge from your thoughts. It's pervasive. It often has unconscious ramifications, meaning that you will act as though you believe it, even if you consciously don't think you believe it. Moreover, these beliefs will be incredibly emotional. That is, they trigger all kinds of intense emotions like fight or flight, or rage, or tears, or terror, or anything else you can imagine. Sounds strange? Well, actually, it's not really that strange. In fact, unconscious beliefs undergird pretty much everything we do. A belief is simply a prediction, and the brain is a massive prediction-making organ, among other things. And emotions are our innate motivation system. When we feel a surge of emotion, it's always to do something, which would be attack or run away or pursue a possible lover or whatever it is. And these are rooted in our deep evolution as a species. As such, these emotional and conscious beliefs can be powerful movers of our inner world, and they often override what we consciously and rationally know. And so if you come to believe in, say, that spiders are incredibly dangerous, you may totally freak out anytime you see one, even if you know consciously that the particular spider is harmless, like maybe a granddaddy longlegs. So sometimes merely knowing that the given experience is right now harmless doesn't seem to make any difference. Our emotional beliefs are extremely powerful, and they cannot be convinced by mere reason alone. We need stronger medicine to deal with them. And there's a good reason for this. Emotional beliefs emerge, as I mentioned, because of evolution. They're triggered defenses or mating responses or a number of other things that have contributed to the survival of the species. And they can be very convincing. Why? Because all the individuals in the millions of years that our species and our proto-human ancestors that didn't have these responses all died out. So emotional beliefs, especially unconsciously acquired ones, can dominate our conscious life and make us, in some cases, utterly miserable. At the root of most depressions, for example, is the belief that there's no hope for us to be happy, that nothing we do will wind up successful, there's nothing out there for me. If these all sound absurd on the surface, it can still be very difficult for them to just get over it, quote unquote, if the source of these beliefs comes from an unconscious emotional origin. So then what about the kind of things that are beliefs that emerge from trauma? Well, generally trauma teaches us at an early age one thing: you don't matter. It's a lie, of course, but when we're children, we absorb a huge number of beliefs, and most of them are unconscious. And we do this because we need to understand the world we live in, and our defensive instincts, those emotional systems that we inherited from our distant primate and mammal, and in some cases even reptile ancestors, use the conscious beliefs that our big brains have created in order to judge when these defenses should kick in. For example, if we believe the world is an incredibly dangerous place and that no one can be trusted, then our defensive emotional instincts will be in overdrive all the time. And that's often what I see. In the case of trauma, the belief that we acquire is that we don't matter to other people. And the reason that this causes such an intense emotional reaction is because of our intensely social nature as animals. In the history of humans on this planet, only those who cared intensely about what others thought about us survived, because most of our survival strategies involve group cooperation. There are some exceptions to this, which I'll get to that, but they're rare. A human that is cast out of the tribe has a drastically lower chance of survival, so we are obsessed with what others think about us. So when our caregivers fail us, this belief comes to dominate our experience because it actually helps us to survive, or at least it has in evolutionary time. And so what do? Well, we behave in this manner with this unconscious belief in place. And we don't even realize that we really believe this. We just act on it because it's so powerful and so emotional. We let other people walk all over us. We continually berate ourselves for the slightest imperfections. We constantly take care of everyone to our own detriment. We even cling to people who mistreat us. And it's because that underneath this, we believe we are in danger of being cast out if we don't do these things. And in the ancestral environment, that was a death sentence. So we avoid it like the death threat that it once was. We will then, of course, carry this belief from then on, unfortunately, because nature tends to stick with what works, even if it's unpleasant, rather than try to help change things up. Now, that's not entirely true, because we do have a healing process that goes on as well. And over time, it is possible to change this belief. And some people who suffer childhood maltreatment, of course, do this. But I can tell you this thing now, it's rarely easy, and it usually requires a lot of inner work. And in fact, a lot of times, symptoms and manifestations of personality disorders and all of this kind of stuff are a result of people reacting to this belief in a way that doesn't really help, but it's an attempt at healing that's misfiring. And what do I mean? So I mean that in some cases, people who suffer this will react with an extremely narcissistic defense. As it's an ego fantasy that they develop as a result of feeling like underneath that, they don't really matter. They'll say, well, yeah, I matter more than anybody else. And so they behave as such. And this is an ego fantasy that is adopted in order to protect the extremely damaged ego underneath. An even more extreme version of this, which I mentioned earlier, is antisocial personalities or extreme psychopathy. Now, it does seem as though people are on a spectrum here, and some people are more prone to this kind of thing than other people. So I think in those cases, if you add trauma to the mixture, you're likely to get someone who is just flat out antisocial. And so what is going on here is that the belief that the world is dangerous is responded to by a counter behavioral pattern that says, well, I'm going to defend against that by being vicious, unempathic, uncaring, screwing over anybody I can that I come across. And of course, there are many other ways that people try to undo the lie that trauma teaches us too. Outbursts of rage, mood swings, severe desire to control everything in their lives, and addictions of all kinds. And there's a lot of them. So what about in fantasy representation? So again, I like to link all this stuff with our fantasy narratives for obvious reasons. And in fiction, we don't often see people who simply just suffer under the yoke of the belief that you don't matter. It does happen sometimes, but more often what we're seeing are those attempts, those maladaptive attempts to fix it. For example, we might see villains who are responding to this with narcissistic defenses or antisocial defenses. But even in that case, it's not always like that. I mean, look at Batman. He has this trauma of his parents being wiped out, which would instill a belief that, well, maybe the world is incredibly dangerous. Maybe he doesn't matter because his parents just got wiped off the planet. And so how does he do? How does he respond to this? Well, he single-handedly tries to take on all injustice. Obviously, it's a little nuts and it's extremely overboard, but it certainly makes for an interesting character. Superman actually is another one like this. His whole civilization was wiped out, and he tries to correct it by taking on the weight of the world. And that's especially the theme of a lot of later iterations of Superman. And in a sense, you can actually see that this is very similar to Batman's reaction, but just on a different scale, because Superman has godlike powers. And so, yeah. So what about, but this, is this idea new? No, it's not new. This idea of transforming trauma has been around forever. First example that came to mind as I was thinking about this was Beowulf. Beowulf also suffered an early trauma. He lost his father in a frivolous raid. His father was not very well thought of, and hence he would have been too in ancient Anglo-Saxon society. He was, for many years, considered a lazy coward until he took on Grendel, in part to try to prove himself, which of course he does. And if you look at my other videos on Beowulf, and we take a deep dive with myself and Nick Iafredi, take a deep dive into Beowulf, and you can see that his battle with Grendel is, in many ways, a battle with this dark side of himself. Anyway, more recently, you can see this in modern fantasy too. For example, Glokta in Abercrombie's First Law trilogy. He's someone who suffered immense trauma as an adult, and his way of dealing with it is to inflict pain on suffering on other people as a way to cope with that lie of trauma. Now, Abercrombie is nuanced enough to show that this is not the only thing going on with him, and there's a whole lot else going on with this character too, which makes him very fascinating, even if he's not in the least bit likable. But anyway, what about healthy healing? So can these beliefs change in a way that's not maladaptive? And of course, the answer is yes. And we continually update our beliefs our whole lives. It's just early beliefs tend to affect us a longer time because they happen first. And they oftentimes set the stage for later experiences in our life. But they can change. The trick is that they don't usually change simply because we point at them and say, that is irrational. I mean, every person that I have, every one of my patients that has anxiety disorders, for example, has someone in their life who just says, well, why don't you just stop worrying? And I'm always like, wow, man, that's brilliant. Why didn't I think of that? It's genius. You know, it's going to put me out of bed. No, it's not going to work. If it was that easy, it would have done it already, for crying out loud. So for whatever reason, that doesn't work very well. Rather, and I think I know why. And I think it's because what we need really is not just someone to point this out and go, well, there you go. It's not that easy because we're talking about emotional defensive responses. And so in order for that to work, what we need are experiences that sink down into our bodies and our emotional experiences. We need transformative experience to counter the traumatic ones. And those can look like many different things. Psychotherapy is one. Hypnotherapy as a type of psychotherapy that is focused on this is deliberately designed to do this. And it works as well. These are things that have proven themselves to work to transform these negative beliefs, these really, really deep-seated ones. And the thing to remember is that there's something that underlies all these possible transformations. And that is, unless you tackle the emotional belief head on and find ways to engage it on a real and emotional human level, it won't change. In other words, simply talking about it in the abstract while not actually engaging with it on an emotional, bodily, deeper level down in the bones will not convince these defensive emotional centers that anything is truly different. And so they'll keep acting in order to protect you. So that's the interesting thing about these emotional defensive responses. They're designed to resist the ego's continual train of thought. And if it doesn't think that the thoughts that the egos come up with are really all that convincing, it'll just ignore it and keep going. So the engagement of the ego with the unconscious is at the root of all of this stuff, because the unconscious is what is producing these emotional responses. Now, what I see, again, kind of linking this to fantasy narratives, is the classic narrative of the hero facing the monster in the cave. What's going on here is the ego is venturing into the unconscious to face these horrible negative self-beliefs head on and grappling with them. And that is what you're seeing symbolized. And you'll see this in dreams, for example, of people struggling with this. If they really are engaging with it, if they're not, they're just running away from it, then that's what they'll dream about. And so that gives you a clue as to what's going on here. But this is why that story is so universal, because it's a universal human experience. In another video, I talked about the folktale of Hansel and Gretel, where the two children are essentially dealing with severe neglect on the part of the caretakers by wandering into the dark forest, and then they run into the witch, and all of the stuff that happens there is about that experience. So, but long story short is the person trying to change their beliefs has to face them head on. They have to do hard, introspective, and deeply challenging work. Because after all, if we could just change them like, well, I just stop worrying. If it was really that easy, then we would be incredibly malleable, and that really wouldn't be all that good either, would it? So, all right, and that's what I have for you today. Make sure you check out King of the Forgotten Darkness. That's my fantasy novel. The link is in the description. And I'll have always got more stuff coming for you. And until then, I'll see you next time.